Welcome to Intention to Treat from the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm Rachel Gottbaum. Today, we talk about translating brain signals into speech for patients who can no longer communicate using a brain-computer interface.
My name is Casey Harrell, and I have a disease that is called ALS.
Casey Harrell has ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis.
I have had this disease for about 5.5 years, and I am 46 years old.
My name is Lavana Saxon. I am a caregiver for my husband who's had ALS for over 5 years. I care for our daughter, who is also 5 years old. Right around the time we had a newborn baby in the house, just a few months old, my husband showed me his leg muscles quivering all over the place, and they didn't stop. And then over the months, they got weaker and weaker. So he had to stop running. He was incredibly athletic. He used to work out an hour a day, would bike to work. He started having bike falls. His walking became harder and harder. It got to the point that I would have to assist him in walking down the stairs.
And then Harold could only walk with a cane. And then not at all.
It was this experience of just having no idea what we were going to lose when and how long we had for each function. We would literally wake up one day to the next and be like, oh, that doesn't work anymore. You now need help with this. Or this doesn't work anymore.
You know it is happening, and you cannot do anything about it. And it just gets worse and worse over time. I did feel like I was in a slow motion car crash.
One of the most heartbreaking mornings was when he realized he couldn't sing anymore. And at that time, he was still singing to our daughter all day, every day. He loved to sing. And that was one of the ways that they'd connect the most. He'd sing about what he was doing. He'd make up the most ridiculous little ditties all day long. And then had some really sweet lullabies he'd sing to her at night. And just one day he woke up and he couldn't sing.
And talking became more difficult for Casey Harrell.
I had a long process of losing my ability to communicate, from losing the ability to sing a song to my daughter, from needing to repeat myself over and over to be understood by most people, to finally needing specific people to translate for me. It was very painful to lose the ability to communicate, especially with my daughter.
I thought the hardest part of him losing his speech was going to be the emotional piece, like losing the sound of his voice, losing him singing, losing the daily chit-chat that is part of a life. But there's all this other stuff that came with it that is unexpected, unnamed, and something we've had to find out and learn the hard way.
You would not believe how many people do not want to watch the slow motion car crash and stay away from us. This happens to every family that is dealing with a terminal disease and over years of illness. People want you to either get better or die. So people walk away from your life, and this is not because they are bad people, but they do not want to do anything because they do not know what to do. And when you cannot talk to them about this, it is even worse.
So that isolation, it like adds to the stress. It kind of adds to a lot of the problems.
Saxon says the loss of speech is one of the cruelest aspects of her husband's disease.
We naively thought the worst part of this disease would be him losing his function. The voice was just a thing that was, a big deal, but like not the worst. We also thought that when he lost his voice, we could just switch to eye gaze and he could just rattle off like Stephen Hawking.
Eye gaze technology allows someone who cannot speak to type on a keyboard using their eyes to move a mouse on screen.
What we didn't know at the time is that Stephen Hawking was not an average eye gaze user. He was absolutely incredible. He had one of the fastest times of anybody. That actually it is very slow and very difficult, and there's a huge learning curve. And we've never totally set that up because my husband didn't want to, because it is so much extra work.
LaVonna Saxon says it got to the point where she was pretty much the only person who could understand what her husband was trying to say. It was a struggle.
I cause him physical and emotional pain almost daily, which sucks, to put it lightly. I'll move him without his consent. I'll say, "Can I move your arm?" I think he says yes, but he really said no. And then I'll move his arm and cause a full body spasm, which can lead to a full body Charlie horse. Or we'll be in the middle of a transfer, and the way I transfer him using a pivot board, I can't always see his feet. So if his ankle is buckled and I'm spraining it, I have no way of knowing because he can't communicate to me while I'm transferring him. So those are some examples of how I'm hurting him all the time because I can't understand him. And then there's another piece of it, which is total dependency on me, that we can't just hire a nurse to come in and stay the night with him and help him with the things that I'm still helping him with, because they won't be able to understand him. They won't be able to get consent from him.
Casey Harrell learned that researchers at UC Davis were working on a brain-computer interface for people with ALS, strokes, and spinal cord injuries. The hope was to use the technology to translate brain signals, a patient's intention to speak, into their own words on a computer screen, and then convert that information into their own voice.
I actually found them.
Casey Harrell and LaVonna Saxon reached out to Dr. David Brandman and his team at the University of California at Davis. They are part of BrainGate, a group of scientists developing brain-computer interfaces. Dr. Brandman leads the BrainGate trials at UC Davis, and he joins us now. We're also joined by Dr. Lee Hochberg. He's the director of BrainGate Consortium and Clinical Trials. So, Dr. Brandman, tell us about brain-computer interfaces and the one your team developed that allows Casey Harrell to speak.
Brain-computer interfaces are devices that record brain signals and then translate those brain signals to allow people to control objects in their environment using their thoughts. When you have someone who is paralyzed that wants to control their arms and legs and move their mouth but can't, we can actually record signals from their brain and then use sophisticated mathematical algorithms to translate those brain signals to allow people to control objects like a wheelchair, a robotic arm, a computer cursor for point-and-click communication, and most recently, to communicate just by trying to speak. And in this study, we can decode their intention to speak and translate that intention to words that appear on a screen. What we're doing is actually recording from a population of neurons and then translating their spiking activity, their communication activity, to allow someone to control a speech neuroprosthesis.
Dr. Hochberg, tell us a little more about the history of this research.
There have now been decades of fundamental research, really asking the question, what does a neuron do? How do individual neurons contribute to something as simple as attempting to move one's hand? When somebody's able-bodied, if that able-bodied person has their hand on a computer mouse or their hand on a trackpad and they're moving their hand to the right, how does a neuron in the cortex actually make that happen? And that's been a question that's now been asked for decades. We'd also like to understand how individual neurons or groups of neurons, how do they contribute for somebody who's able-bodied to making vocalizations, to creating speech.
So how does this technology work?
So the device itself is a 4 by 4 millimeter platform, what we'll call an array, roughly the size of an M&M. Each of those arrays are connected by fine wires to a connector, basically a plug, that's secured to the top of the head, visible through the scalp. We then connect a small cable to that small plug, And that cable brings the electrical signals that we're recording in the brain back out to the computers that can begin to decode that activity. All brain-computer interfaces have three components. There's a sensor that records from the brain in some manner. There's what we could call a decoder or an interpreter that takes that signal of interest and then converts it back into the control of the third component of a brain-computer interface, which is the spoken speech, of computer-generated speech, or it could be the movement of a robot arm, or it could be the movement of a cursor. So we have a sensor, we have an interpreter, and we have the output. And in our ongoing BrainGate clinical trials, which have now been ongoing for more than 20 years, we're using a particular sensor that has this amazing ability to record from dozens, if not 100 or more, individual neurons in the cortex. Individual neurons that all have some role in creating either voluntary movement or voluntary speech. Once that signal's in hand, once that signal is being recorded, that is the action potentials that are firing away from this group of neurons, that signal then can go into the decoder that can do the extraordinary job of turning those signals that are related to the intention to move or to speak into either movement or speech.
So in your article, you described what happened with Casey Harrell, the patient we heard from earlier. Harrell reached out to BrainGate and agreed to have the array implanted into his brain. Tell us how the patient uses the system.
In this paper, we describe how a technician from our group went over to his home, assembled the plugs, as Dr. Hochberg just described, that allowed us to record brain signals into the series of computers that were doing the work. We turned on the system and allowed him to speak. He could speak with his spouse, his daughter. He could speak with members of the engineering team, the research team. In other words, we showed up to this man's house, we plugged in our computers, we gave him some basic instructions of what to do, and then half an hour later, we could decode what he was trying to say with 99% accuracy. When the computer detects he's trying to speak, it begins decoding whatever he's trying to say, and words appear on that screen. So he tries to say, I'm looking for a cheetah. After he has said those words, using an eye tracker, he can say, yep, this is what I meant to say. And then we have a little button we created on the side, where when he looks at that button and selects it, he can hear the words, I'm looking for a cheetah, in his own voice.
We should talk about the cheetah. We look on the screen and we see him say, I'm looking for a cheetah. That, with our scientific hat on, that's got to be an error. There's no way that what he actually just said was that he was looking for a cheetah, except for the fact that his 4-year-old daughter had just walked into the room dressed as a cheetah. And that moment is really what said to me, this is a technology that's not just working. This is a technology that could, in the future, could change people's lives. It could restore immediate, meaningful, important discussion between family members, between friends, between the user and their care partner, their healthcare provider. And to see a word like cheetah appear underscored for me that, there really was 125,000 word vocabulary that was made available to him on the second day that he was using this technology.
So, Dr. Brandman, Casey Harrell is now able to do a lot more with this technology. Tell us about that.
He can be sitting in his bedroom or sitting in his living room. He just tries to talk. Our computer system detects he's trying to speak, and words appear on his screen. If he wants to write an email, he will dictate whatever email he wants to write. He'll push a button, and the text will be copied into his email program. If he wants to send a text message, he'll type whatever he wants. Using an eye tracker, he'll click a button, and that information will be sent to a text messaging program. In fact, he could Zoom into meetings, and he has been using his brain-computer interface to help maintain his livelihood, despite being wheelchair-bound and despite not being understood when he speaks without a brain-computer interface.
So are there other types of patients who could potentially benefit from this kind of brain-computer interface?
A lot of the work up to this point has focused on folks who want to talk but can't because of the mechanics of speech not working. be that either a muscular problem, or be that a nerve problem, or be that a transmission of information from the brain to the nerves. The wiring going from the brain to the muscles is not working. ALS, spinal cord injury, brainstem stroke, and so forth. But what if we could help people with cortical strokes? What if we help people with aphasias? What if we could help people with other kinds of neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's disease? And what if we could help people who have never spoken, like with cerebral palsy, for example? Could we potentially give them the tools they need to be able to start speaking? I think there's a lot of potential for this technology moving forward in looking at other kinds of indications, because frankly, there are patients that need these technologies now.
So how could that work in patients with no residual speech where the neurons may be destroyed?
There's any number of reasons, whether by neurodegenerative disease or by injury, whether that's stroke or traumatic injury, where there are parts of the brain that have become disconnected. And I suspect that in the future, there may be ways to reconnect these disconnected parts of the nervous system, and as a result, to restore some of the lost neurologic function.
And how could that work?
It would be somewhat uncommon for a stroke to completely eliminate every functioning neuron related to a given function. Chances are the brain tissue right next to the part of the brain that's been affected by the stroke, it's still working, still firing away, it's still engaged in that cognitive or motor activity, but it's not able to get its signals across the injury. So if we can reconnect the disconnected parts of the nervous system, if we can harness the unbelievably rich information in the firing rates of individual neurons, and we can bring that back so that when those neurons are firing, when they're trying to move their hand, the cursor moves. When they're trying to speak, they can hear that attempted speech. That's the basis to create technologies that will restore agency, restore autonomy.
Dr. Hochberg, when do you expect to see these kinds of devices being offered to patients?
When asked a few years ago, how long is it going to take for there to be an implantable brain-computer interface that's available and on the market, I would have said a decade or more. I'm really excited that with the advances from publicly funded science, from the investment from industry, that we're probably now only a few years away from the first of the implantable brain-computer interfaces becoming available. I spend some of my time as a neurointensive care physician, and I meet people in the neuro ICU who are no longer able to move their arms and legs, and they're unable to speak. And in other cases, I meet people with ALS who have been progressively losing not only the ability to move, but the ability to speak, and now may also be losing the ability to breathe comfortably and to ventilate adequately. I want nothing more than to be able to say, I'm sorry that this happened, but we have a technology and we can restore your ability to move, or we can restore your ability to communicate easily, and we can restore it now. And those are all hopes for the field. But I think what's happened over the past several years is collectively implantable brain-computer interfaces have gotten closer to being able to offer future patients with neurologic injury or illness a method to rapidly regain neurologic function. And this is a step in demonstrating just how quickly we might be able to restore fluent and easy communication for somebody with ALS.
Thank you both so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's Dr. David Brandman. He directs the BrainGate trials at UC Davis, and also Dr. Lee Hochberg. He's director of BrainGate Consortium. Casey Harrell now uses their new brain-computer interface on a daily basis to help him speak, despite his ALS.
I have to intend to talk, and the computer is taking that attention and turning it into words on the screen in front of me. It is not trying to read my mind or read my thoughts. I am trying to talk, and that is what the computer is decoding.
So BrainGate has completely transformed our lives because of the communication he's now able to do that he wasn't able to do before. It's a night and day difference when Casey is connected and can communicate and then just be Casey. He gets to fully be himself.
It is bringing me closer to people by enabling me to communicate by myself and not with someone else as a translator. and is enabling me to participate in conversations in real time.
He's now chatting on text with his close friends again. More and more people are coming by, and now instead of me having to translate and help him interact with somebody who's come over, they can just sit down next to him and have a real conversation, you know, in a way that they haven't been able to in years, like a deep, real conversation.
It has also allowed me to continue to work full-time and more efficiently than before. I am about half of the speed of a normal person who's talking, and that is good enough for now to keep up with the flow of conversation. And this is important because communication is the lifeblood of life.
I want for Casey to have a deep connection with his daughter, and it is endlessly heartbreaking for him. I think he would say it's the hardest part of ALS, is being around his daughter but not having her interact with him. And now that's shifting. I feel like my daughter has a dad again.
This is Intention to Treat from the New England Journal of Medicine. We had help from our editors, Dr. Alan Roper and Dr. Patrick O'Malley, and producer, Bridget McCarthy. Our managing editor is Deborah Molina, and our engineer is Adam Strauss. I'm Rachel Gottbaum.